Welcome everybody, Brady here from BGWX. I just recorded a whole video, and after I get the beautiful notification that it did not save. So I'm not really going to waste any more time. We're breaking down Tropical Storm Erin, and without further ado, let's get going. So we're going to be talking about what's going on currently and the potential impacts down the line in the short range, medium range, and long range for anybody living in the Atlantic right now. So that's what we're going to be going into. So, but for now, let's talk about what's going on currently. As you can see, a little bit more degraded recently with its satellite presentation. If we, really zoom out here, and we'll go 48. We'll go weather nerds here, and you can take a look and see that trekking its way along, but it's had some trouble with some northerly and northeast share as well, just like we were talking about last night with its satellite presentation, continuing to move along a little bit west southwest, due west, somewhere along those lines. We'll see how long it takes before this thing actually starts going west northwest, because that will make a huge difference in the end result. But currently it's 45 knots, 1002 millibars. Could have made a case for 50 knots, but currently holding at 45 knots, 1002 millibars, some gradual strengthening we saw today. Nothing too crazy though, even though satellite presentation did improve at times. But the reason why we're not seeing any crazy intensification is there is still that wind shear, but it's transporting all this dry air here into our system. So we take a look, still all of this dry air out ahead here, and it's wrapping its way into the system. And like I mentioned on X, there's only so many things you can look at before looking at the common core principles. Dry air is not good for tropical cyclones. Let's put it that simply. You cannot have this wrapping into your system and expect it to be able to rapidly intensify. It just cannot take place. So I would continue to expect over the next day or two some of the same stuff we've been seeing. And I think maybe once we start getting more towards Friday, I think that's when we can start looking at potential for more rapid intensification, maybe late tomorrow night at the earliest. But I would expect this not to be a hurricane for at least most of the day tomorrow, if at all tomorrow. So I would expect only some gradual strengthening at best, in my opinion, just based on the current picture. I think it's still going to have to deal with a little bit of wind shear until the environment becomes a little bit more, the upper level environment comes a little bit more favorable in terms of wind shear as we progress towards get closer to, and into the weekend, and from there we'll see some significant strengthening and very rapid intensification potentially. But in the meantime, dry air still persists here in the low levels, and especially when we're starting from the surface of our system. Remember, we go vertically. Hurricanes start from the top down or start from the bottom up, right? So if low level dry air, one of the most important areas, because that's where it's starting, if that's where we have the most dry air, look where it's going to come towards, right? It's going to start towards the bottom of our system, and that's where it starts. So that is going to be a huge problem for a system that's trying and attempting to rapidly intensify. So that's why we have not seen it yet. And you can see just dry air continuing to really wrap into this system's core here, associated with that Saharan air layer that came over and is still in front of the system. But again, 45 knots, 1002 millibars, so it's still kind of trekking its way along, but we have to keep a close eye potentially if we are continuing to see a lack of latitude gain, currently sitting around 16 degrees north currently. That could cause some problems eventually down the line for somewhere like the Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, Turks and Caicos. We're going to have to keep a very close eye, because if ridging is underestimated here, we could have some significant problems, and especially a weaker system will definitely feel, at least over the next few days, that west-southwest flow more so than that west-northwest flow. We do have this ridge present here. Models tend to underestimate more than overestimate the strengths of ridges out here in the open Atlantic due to the poor sampling. It's just we see them often under rather than overestimate. So to some extent, I would expect that to be the case. Question would be then, how much would we see this be underestimated? And and that could especially a weaker system would definitely feel the strength of this high, being able to steer this a little bit more to the west southwest a little bit more. Or just the low level trade winds, rather, I should say, would be able to carry the system a little bit more west southwest. And this high pressure is what's preventing this thing from being able to just kick to the north right away, and it's allowing these trade winds to help steer this more to the west. Now the question is, and I would even go back a little bit more over time, is how much latitude gain. You can see that latitude gain advertised a little bit. Uh, Later this morning into the day, and then also tomorrow night. How much? It's saying it's going to get, we're seeing the euro have this thing get to 20 degrees north. By the time it gets to 60 degrees west. We're currently, it's approaching 50 degrees west right now. I think it's about 40, almost 48 degrees west, a little bit further west now. So we're approaching 50 degrees west, and this thing is still around 16 degrees north. So this is certainly something we're going to have to keep a close an eye on, because at a minimum there could be some tropical storm force winds and heavy rain and thunderstorms for our northern Leeward Islands and Puerto Rico as well. So we have to keep a very close eye. Again, for those that aren't confused potentially, this is Erin right here. We're looking at the upper level, so that's why we're looking at 500 millibars, so much more above the surface. So that's why it's less pronounced and a little bit weaker looking at the chart, versus if we looked at 850 millibars, which is more towards lower levels, looking more towards the lower levels of the atmosphere. You can see that's much more pronounced. You can clearly see it there. But taking a look then, regardless of if it's, making a very close, if not a direct strike, or if it's, 100 miles more northeast than what you're seeing on this specific model run here, just to give a general idea, I feel like the euro is a good middle ground between stuff right now, at least in the short term. Then the question becomes, what happens after this? Do we see how strong is this trough out here in the open Atlantic? That will make a difference. How much is modeling underestimating the ridging going on out here in the central Atlantic, out here in the open waters of the basin? That makes a huge impact. If we're seeing at this point a stronger system, so if we're seeing a stronger high pressure here, that will steer this thing a little bit further, at least west, if not southwest, if we see this fill in under this trough as well. So the strength and the placement here of this low pressure system out here in the Atlantic will definitely play a big part. And then right after that, here's where I think one of the bigger questions becomes is, how much after we see that we have a retrograding low here that's moving into Newfoundland. So forget the exact placement of where Erin is, and granted this could be different. I would make a case that this could really be anywhere along this area, right? Maybe I drew it a little bit too far, but this could be anywhere along this area right now. I would argue potentially. So it really it could be anywhere from Bahamas to much more hundreds of miles east of where you're seeing the euro put it right now. But how strong is the ridging here? Right, and then this is a tough process. We have lots of upper level lows you're seeing in this picture now. How do these interact with one another? Models here up into Newfoundland, that you can know in the wintertime, it can get difficult to sometimes forecast these things. But we're going to have a retrograding low over northeast Atlantic Canada here. This is going to be a mess for models to try to figure out. I'm telling you, right now it will be a huge problem for models to figure out. So I'm not going to go too deep and dive into the model noise. But my question is, how much do we fill in behind? What's the location? How far south does the troughing dip here in Atlantic Canada? How strong is it as well? What's the speed? How quickly does it hang around after we see this retrograding process take place? Meaning slow loop basically of this upper level low out here, because you do have this high pressure kind of locking this thing in here. Or are we going to see this kind of kick out? Or are we going to see more of a weakness in the high pressure over here? Allow our Atlantic Canada lows kind of to swing out here further to the east, allow, high pressure to build in more here, and that'd be a huge concern. So there's a lot of different factors I'm watching, but at a minimum, how quickly, how much does ridging build in here, and then how tucked away is this as well from any potential weakness in the ridge? Because the less, the more pronounced, this troughing is here, the more it will at least tug it a little bit more north in latitude initially, versus if it's feeling a little bit less of the troughing out here in the steering currents, and this is a little bit more tucked to the southwest, and that's a strong storm, then we start looking at very significant concerns for the Bahamas, even the southeast US now, because at a minimum, if it gets tucked in here, any storm that gets tucked into the Bahamas becomes an immediate concern for the southeast, as we've seen, with storms like Dorian, Matthew, just off of recent memory, storms, like this. I think Sandy was one that moved through the Bahamas as well. Anything that kind of moves there. Sandy will did the weird loop, obviously, so it kind of kicked away and then came back. But any storm that does get into the Bahamas does become a concern to look closely at. So, have to keep a close concern then. And then if I zoom just a little bit more beyond, here's what I would say. Then we have to start looking also at the location of the Atlantic Canada troughing going on here, this big upper level low, the interaction, like I said, this is going to be different, complex, messy every single run we see here, but also the exact location, how does the high pressure build in behind it, how does high pressure build in here, that will all play a huge factor, because the angle at which this exits latitude as well could be huge. If this is let's say further southwest and it's moving more north versus kicking right away, that makes a huge difference. So we have to keep a very close eye on that as well. And the more this hangs around, right? So if models can oftentimes overestimate the retrograding process and kind of let it stew around a little bit in the medium to longer range, they can just have fun. A little bit more fun models tend to have, like, oh, we got this fancy new toy, this nice retrograding low out here in Atlantic Canada. Let's play around with it a little bit, and then we'll come to our senses to realize we can't hang on to it forever. So sometimes they do play around with these just a little bit too much. So we have to keep a very close eye on what goes on here, because if this kicks out sooner, that means that this ridging fills in more, and that forces this at least closer to the US, and then we'll have to keep an eye on how strong the ridging is out here as well in the US, because it's all connected, right? If this is so strong here ridging over the US, that's obviously going to want to push system not as far away, whereas if it's a little bit weaker, that will allow a little bit easier of a path to move towards the US. So a lot of different things. I know it's complex, it's tricky, but I hope, and I know it's dense, but they're important factors that we have to discuss when forecasting this system. So, there's just a lot of different things we have to keep a very close eye on. And here's the current cone. I would say I would keep this even just a little bit further south, in my opinion, because I think there's still some concern for the some of our Atlantic islands, people living there. But in the near term, again, Northern Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, we have to keep a close eye on you, and eventually we'll have to keep a close eye on the Bahamas as well. So be prepared, have a plan of action ready to go in place. If you're living in any of these areas, especially, southeastern Bahamas, you would have to keep a close eye, because this storm will be a lot stronger by the time it gets to you. So a lot of different things, but I hope this is all making sense. We'll probably be back again tomorrow night. I got cut off, so I don't know how much I said last time that I didn't say this time. Maybe it was a little bit less dense and more clear, but I appreciate you all tuning in. If you don't mind hitting the like, it does help a lot. But in the meantime, I will likely see you tomorrow night, if not, if something crazy happens. But regardless, I'll probably be back tomorrow night. Appreciate y'all.